Um, in particular, one that I'm quite fond of, Drupaler, having used a number of different systems that are out there. I think it has a lot of advantages and a great application in the educational space. I'd rather hope that this would be kind of a post-mortem about our transition to Drupaler that we're going through shortly. And we have done quite a bit of work with it. I've done quite a bit of more work, as in part because we have not gotten all the university things. You will see a number of other websites that I work with in other contexts, nonprofit organizations and some other things, just because they have particular features turned on and things that I can demo on those sites. So let's see some of those. So a short background on where we come from with our current website. We have a website that consists of about 800 megabytes of documents, and one of the nice features is that it's going to not let me. This is our current website. Like I said, it's about 800 megabytes, which seems rather large for what you'll see here. In fact, I think it is. We have a lot of navigation things are done with server-side includes, and it's kind of a fairly static site in many ways, with the exception of a few areas that we have down at the bottom of the left column. You notice, like extranet. We have some database-backed things for people to log into, which is one of about probably 40 different logins that our users have to different systems. And some systems, they have multiple logins or passwords depending on how they're logging into the system. So we have a lot of disparate things that need to be consolidated into a single content management system. We also have, and this is a little challenging to navigate from over here. For example, you see we have things like career services, current student info, but then lower down we have registrar. And so there are some things that are grouped by where they belong, and there are some things that are grouped by who publishes the information. And so it's not at all intuitive for users. So this is kind of where we're starting from to get to our ideal site that we're going to put into a content management system. Currently, every single file on the website is edited manually. Another side effect of this is that we have way too many PDF documents on the site. We'll get a one-liner first assignment, and our faculty assistants will turn it into a PDF, and they'll send us that PDF, and we'll post a PDF that literally has one sentence in it saying, read pages 1 through 100 of this book. We have a lot of accessory sites, and then we have like the extranet, which uses an access database running on IIS as its back end, and beautiful things like plain text passwords stored in the database in plain text. So, I'm hesitant to encourage people to use secure passwords with it because it would give us all access to it. A little bit more, and I think I said most of this, is our navigation is one of the key areas that we need to look at, how we improve the site. I'll digress for just a second because I think it's somewhat relevant just to give you an idea. These are some of the different content management systems that I've worked with over the years. I don't know, has anybody worked with PlayBasket? Anybody? That was back about 95, 96, and then Frontier has quite a bit of power, and I worked with it quite a bit before it became a very expensive product, at least for someone with no budget and no money to spend on it. It does have an object database, which is quite interesting, which also is Zope, the one here at the bottom, which is Python-based with an object database. It is interesting because then your code for a site, as well as the content for the site, all reside in the same database, which can be quite interesting. I've also worked with Cold Fusion. One I don't list up here, I've worked quite a bit with Microsoft's content management system. And I don't list it mainly because many of the shortcomings of it that I encountered, I believe had to do with our implementation at a previous company I was with, not with the product itself, so I won't really make comparisons to that. And this is a wonderful slide that I got half changed, that at the top says that there are 2 sides. Really, there are 3. And it's about how do you bring together the authors of content so that people can easily put out just things that are basically as easy to write as email. The technologists who make the site run, who actually make it work and provide code to do dynamic things or keep content up to date or provide calendars of current events. And then some people consider the users. They're probably pretty important. How you want them to access it. One of the things that we expect to get from this is that I can set up a system where you, based on being an author, can go in, author content based on your role. If you're the registrar, you go in, you still have something that consolidates all the registrar's information. At the same time, the students can go in and see a current students page that has all the relevant information, not only from the registrar, but the associate deans, any professors for classes that they're in, and any other information in the same place. And please feel free to type in if you have questions or want to say anything along the way. So one of the resources that I highly recommend if you're looking at all at content management systems, and especially if you're looking at open source content management systems, is opensourcecms.com. Comes up. You'll notice in the left side here, there's a countdown. And what they have assembled here is a demonstration of many different content management systems that you can go in, open up, and actually both see a screenshot of, but you can log in, you can administer it, you can make all the changes that you want, you can build custom things, short of anything that would, say, require an FTP, but many different systems have upload capabilities built in. You can basically do everything that you want, and then every couple of hours they go through and reset everything to a default configuration so that somebody else can come in and play. And you can change usernames, passwords, and they have quite a few, as we'll see. They also have them broken down. This is a ratings page which rates the different CMSs. You'll notice over here they have a content basically type that says what type of CMS it is. So there's a lot that are portals, there's some that basically just do blogs, some that do groupware. Another one, if anybody's looking at groupware things, if they want to talk about it, that I can talk some about, is this e-groupware, which we have used. We used it basically for calendaring in our clinic as we were getting ready to put in a case management system or the other CMSs in our clinic. But as you can see, there are many, many open source options around content management. There are a number that are built off of one called Nuke, Post-Nuke. There are even some others. I don't see where it is here. I'm sure it's here somewhere. PHP website, which also has some of the Nuke series in its background. And the whole Nuke series was kind of a way of building Slashdot on another open source platform so that people could put together sites very much like Slashdot. And this is a wonderful slide that didn't get moved to the right spot. These are a few of the open issues with Drupal, just a few things to be aware of. If you turn on things like blogs so that, say, students can create blogs or employees can create blogs, and they have comments, the new thing, if you haven't seen it, is comment spam, where people go around in order to increase their Google page rank and put in spam in comments that has links to their website. So you can learn all about online poker or Viagra or anything else. And as with other spam, they put in nonsense text or other things. So there are a few solutions, but they generally are along the lines of restricting who has access to post comments to registered users, which dramatically cuts down on anybody outside the community commenting or deciding to do it. Ease of installation. I'll walk through a process that I would recommend for how you would implement this so that you can easily do it multiple times. But it doesn't have, unlike the PHP website and some other products, it doesn't have a 1 or 2 click little wizard to guide you through. So you do have to do either some command line stuff on the Unix box or install some other tools that we'll see in a minute, like PHP website, or not PHP website, PHP My Admin, to do the database administration if you don't want to do really any command line stuff. And as we'll see, it depends heavily on modules. There are modules to do all sorts of things, which we'll take a look at. Some of these modules also have database components, and they can be difficult to upgrade. They're also presently difficult to track, because while they have a page where you can download the latest version of each module, the one thing kind of missing from that is a date that says when that module was last updated. So you can go download the same dot release of it, the same high-level version, but it could have changed in the last few days, and unless you're diligent about going through it, it is something that the Drupal developers are working on, getting a better way to do that. So currently we're using Drupal 4.6. It's pretty standard requirements, requires PHP. It works with PHP 5, they say, although that's fairly recent, so I tend to use it with PHP 4. It's fairly easily extensible, especially you have to know something about PHP to do most of the extensions on it. It's well documented, has an active community. And again, it says that it works with MySQL or Postgres. The truth seems to be that it works very well with MySQL. There are some fairly consistent patches being put in to try and get the PostgreSQL support up to the same level. This taxonomy is one of the things that I think really distinguishes Drupal, and we'll look at some examples of this in a minute, but the ability to take any piece of content and to classify it in as many ways as might be relevant to your organization. I mentioned down here 3 types of classification that you might want to do for any piece of content. Who the audience is, what the related course is, and content expiration, which would be a bit of a kludge, because one of the things that I haven't found in any of the open source CMSs yet is a good way to do content expiration, to say, okay, a year after content is entered, we're no longer going to consider it valid unless somebody goes back through and revalidates it. Many of the commercial CMSs do that, but I haven't really seen it in the open source. You could do a kludge here that said, okay, let's flag all content created this year. There are probably some better ways to do it, such as writing a script that would go through and automatically unpublish everything that had been written more than 2 years ago until you went through, and then it would give you a list basically to go through and say, okay, what's the, which content is still valid. So what you need for implementation is pretty basic. MySQL, again, Postgres will work if you're heavily into Postgres. Apache, 1 or 2, doesn't matter. PHP module, obviously for Apache this is PHP based, so you'll need that compiled in. Mod rewrite is a Apache module. It's not technically required. However, especially if you're using this on public-facing websites and you want nice, clean URLs that don't have question marks and ampersands and lots of arguments after them, which is especially important if you're being indexed by search engines and you want Google to find the public site. Mod rewrite becomes more of a requirement than a nice to have.
What does it do? What kind of URL does it replace it with?
It can replace it with a very short one, so that I can take something that would be question mark equals, or node equals 371 ampersand Jones ampersand, and replace it with something that just says about. So that if I go to law.unlv.edu/about, I get that page instead of. And to do that, it's necessary. It will also take the one that I just mentioned, which would, the default is that you would always have a question mark q equals node/331. It would also shorten that down just to law.unlv.edu/node331. Because many of the search engines, I haven't checked this recently, I know Google didn't used to index anything that has the question mark and beyond it. They would just look at the main page. Well, in this case, that would only give you the first page of the website and none of the rest of it if you don't have the mod rewrite to do something. In Drupal, they actually call it clean URLs, so that they look, nice, clean URLs. But it is necessary to do that. And it's really nice. Drupal has a very nice thing for virtual hosts. So it's very nice to have control of your DNS and to be able to assign multiple names to a machine. So that if you want to, you could have facultyname.law.institution.edu, for example, so that each faculty member appears to have their own website. They can have complete control of, if you want to provide 3 or 4 templates and they can choose which template they want. You can do that with DNS. They can still have control if you do it law.edu/faculty name, but they can't have as much control in that case because they are subject to some of the same kind of global requirements. The setup is fairly straightforward. It doesn't take a lot of time, especially after you've done it a few times. Download the latest release and untar it. Set up your DNS to point whatever DNS name to the box that you're using. Set up the Apache server to point to the right directory, and in particular, again, if you're using virtual hosts. One of the combinations that you can do here, if you have wild carding in your DNS, is that you can say www.anything.law.unlv.edu points to this web server. And then you can tell Apache, if you don't know what that is, then just go look in this directory. And then in Drupal, as we'll see in a minute, you show it how to handle each of those requests so that it goes down a default list and says, okay, do I have a site for that faculty name? Yes, I do, so serve up their specific site. If I don't have a site for that particular faculty member, then serve up the generic faculty site. And lastly, if it's not a faculty request, serve the main web page for the school. Set up a database user so that the system can log into the database. Obviously, set up the database. It comes with the scripts to do the database installation and to set everything up. So it's just a matter of running those scripts and setting up the database. And then edit the configuration file. If you're not doing anything particularly fancy, there's literally only one line that has to be edited, and it's the one that has the database user and password for the database as well as where the database is located. Typically, you can co-locate these, although if you're doing a very large site, you probably want to split up your Apache and MySQL servers for performance. And you can do all the same kinds of things that you can with MySQL in terms of replication if you want to use, get into very large implementations, although it does scale quite nicely and it does do very well without a whole lot of the server. And then a few things, once you get it set up, you customize it, and I'll show you why in a minute, but you want to pick from it comes with a default set of about 5 different themes or looks that you can apply to a site. So you want to pick one of those, not that you're going to necessarily use it long term, but you pick that, configure your individual site settings, install any modules that you're going to want to use over and over again, and then, because of the complexity of setting this up, what you want to do is create a copy of the database. Because what you're going to do is set up a new database for each site that you want to set up. So if I'm going to set up Brauer.law and Jones.law, then I would create a database for each of those. You can go through this whole process for each one, but if you do this, it's a whole lot easier because then you only set up the PHP code and the web server once, and then you just set up a new database and change the configuration file for each subsequent website. Okay. So we'll take a look at a few. Hopefully, of the features. One of the things that Drupaler, and a few of you may have seen this site, this is, in case you don't know, this is the Technoids email list site. And one of the things that Drupaler can be set up to do is to check either a POP or an IMAP mailbox, and to take that mail and convert it into postings and there's a number of things you can talk on the Technoid site. They're posted as something called forums. They can be blog posts, or they can be any number of.
What's the name of that module?
I'm sorry?
What's the name of that module?
That is the mail handler module.
Can you set that up as essentially as webmail, or is that?
Yeah, it's not even really web. No, it's not webmail. But what you do, and on this site, it's over here, down this side on the column, this is our, we were just talking about this a little bit in our last session. We have an email list the campus puts out where they tell us about 100 times about each retirement that we have and each thing going on. And some of it's relevant, some of it's not. So using the mail handler module, what I did is just set up a rule that says, if it's from this information list, forward it to an account. All that account does is the website, Drupaler, logs in about once every 10 minutes and checks. If there's an email message in there, it gets turned into a post on the website. And as a result, it also, and I can set up here, there are general taxonomy things, so I said that it's for everything posted in here will be for a general audience, a non-technical audience, and that it's related to the UNLV information list. So if I go in here, the other thing that I now have that I didn't before, if you used RSS at all, is that I have an RSS feed for this email spam, which moves it out of my email box, puts it into a newsreader where I'm much more likely to occasionally want to go through and see the information. And that's all basically the mail handler module doing that. Combination basically of the mail handler and the fact that it's taxonomy, and I have a separate RSS feed for any category of information. As I mentioned, there are themes, and it's not where I thought we were going to go. I'll have to change it here in a second. This is another site. We took an existing theme, existing graphics and content, and basically created a new theme which requires some PHP, some RSS, some CSS, too many acronyms, and a little bit of coding, but really not a lot. In fact, there are now some themes that you can do entirely in CSS and HTML without really having to do any and to change the way an entire site looks is really as simple as going in, selecting from a list of available themes. You notice here there's a theme which I haven't created a screenshot for called Banker. That was the site that we were just looking at. Both of these sites run on the same server, out of the same directory, it's the same PHP code. They're just hooked up to different databases in the back end through a change of one line in a config file. So if I wanted to, I could take this site and say, you know, I like the way this looks better, and save it. And now the entire site is including is in that look. Again, all the same content's there. It's also very easy. Now, these, as I said, were actually content that's posted by this Mail to application. But it's very easy online editing. It looks a little crowded here, and it is because of the way the user that I'm logged in as has a lot of privileges. And one of the things I'll show you in a minute is you can go through and control like who has privileges to see even each of these boxes within the within publishing the content. You see some things with asterisks, so it's required that you have a title. Here, back to the question about clean URLs, this is, I want this to show up if you go law/find_computer_name. And so you can put anything in there. Here, I've got 3 taxonomies set up on this site, and I could have more, I could have less. One, you're required to specify an audience. Technical level, because it has the option none, I can put things in without putting a technical level on it. Topic, again, I can have as many topics as I wanted or as few. These aren't, and I'm not suggesting that these are perfect categories, and they do need some work, but it is an example of what you can do. The body, you'll see here, because this was taken from somewhere else, it's got some HTML in it. You can do it. You can do input and anything up through full PHP or HTML. Or you can do filtered HTML, where basically you can just type text and you hit returns at the end of paragraphs, and it automatically converts it into HTML, puts in line breaks and page breaks. There are some additional modules to do things like images. So if people want to include an image in their post, they click on the button down here that says Add Image. You can attach files, and I'll be showing some stuff on another site here in just a minute, because this is not the latest version. But in the latest version, if you want to do anything with podcasting, if you put attachments on, the first attachment will be included in the RSS feed. So if you want to do something like attach an MP3 file, then basically your blog that you're doing using this site would become a podcast just by attaching the MP3 file there, and of course telling people to put it into their podcasting client. Yes?
The HTML interface you have there where the HTML is already created, is that what the user would see when going back to edit existing content?
No. What they see here, for example, if we actually look, because this is set as filtered HTML, if we actually looked at the HTML it produces, there would be a line break added at the end of each of these lines, which isn't great HTML, and I probably should have taken the time to put it in as full HTML so that it wouldn't do that.
Okay.
But no, it takes those line breaks back out. I mean, it doesn't actually put them in the text. It does it at the time that it takes the text out of the database to create the web page. One of the other things, and again, this is another non-law school website, is flexible content types. So it comes with, by default, things called books, stories, and blogs are the three of the main ones that allow you to create different types of stories. Stories are kind of standalone blogs it puts together by users so that you've got, you know, a user's blog and their blog posts. The main difference with books, and we can see one of those in a second, is that you get the navigation. So you get a table of contents and an up and a down and a next page and a previous page. But they're essentially stories that are linked together. For this project, we have participants, high school juniors, who are submitting legislation. So we wanted to have certain fields to say, okay, who submitted it, the summary text, the text of the legislation, when it was amended, when the hearings were anticipated. And we have quite easily, again, somebody with no HTML experience, anything else, actually created this portion of it. Because there's a list over here of, okay, if I wanted to add a field type of, you know, I wanted a field for MP3s, I click on MP3 and I say, okay, what do I want it to say next to the field? What do I want the help text to be? Is it required? Do I show it in the teaser? In other words, in the short summary, should I show that there's an MP3 file there or not? If I'm looking at a table listing, do I want to see the MP3 file listed in the table or not? And I can, if I go over here, I can create as many different content types as I want. Mentioned that there are books. The main difference with books, as I've mentioned, is that there are kind of a table of contents, as well as it adds the next previous navigation so that you can navigate through the book, and automatically adds a printer-friendly version. So if I want to print out the entire book, I can do so. Let's look at this one. Again, that's why I did too much HTML in it. One of the other features, we'll start with roles. You can define as many roles as you want, so different types of people. There's a couple of predefined ones: anonymous user, which is somebody who hasn't logged in, authenticated user. But then you can define as many different roles as you want: administration, in this case participant, staff, web admins, faculty, student workers, a number of different categories. And then for each role, you have very granular control. And unfortunately, the headers don't scroll, but basically each column is a different role. So as we were looking a moment ago at the legislation, so as far as who's allowed to create legislation, it's basically anybody that's logged into the site is allowed to create legislation, and they're allowed to edit their own legislation once they've submitted it. But you can even give them permissions to enter things that they can't edit, for Dropbox type things, different nodes. There's a couple that become critical, and it almost seems somewhat silly and like they should take them off. Like that, actually we have one case that we use it for an internal blog where we keep track of some of our security issues, where nobody can access the content unless they've logged in. And so you can check it off. That's a fairly critical one. If you uncheck that one, if you're not logged in, you can't access the content, which actually means that you don't get the login page if you don't know where it is, and it's kind of a death spiral from there. Another one is search content. You can quite happily put the search box on there for all levels of users, but people who aren't logged in won't actually get any results when they do searches because they don't have permissions to. Another possibility that you have is setting up complete workflows in here. This is, again, the legislative side, but we have a workflow that says, okay, it's submitted, and then the possible transitions that can happen after it's submitted. This is a fairly linear workflow in some points, but there are things that can happen. You know, after a House vote, you can go in and say what transitions can happen after a House vote. I keep using my mouse, I apologize. So, you know, from one state to another, these things can happen. So again, with content, if you wanted to, you could set up special content for your front page, and it has to go through a different editorial process, and a different number of people have to sign off on it, and after it's gotten the dean's approval and the faculty members' approval, then it can be published.
Please talk briefly about how you tie the workflow to the users and the user groups that you just described.
It's basically by types, so it goes back to who has administrative rights to administer the workflows, can move content, and there are there's administering the workflow, and then there's also who has rights to edit like in this case, the legislation.
Right.
So people have rights to edit their own legislation, but there are other people that have rights to edit all legislation. And the workflow is actually automatic. So once it goes from this state, then there's a pop-up. If we were to look at so if we were to look at a piece of legislation, that's basically the legislation with the different categories there. Because I have rights, when I edit it, down here at the workflow, I can change. But the user, the person who submitted this, who doesn't have those rights, just would not see the workflow. Now, because of where this bill is, I only have three choices. It's submitted, or I assign it to a committee, or send it to first reading. I cannot, even with having all privileges on the site, I can't go from submission to enacted without some required steps happening in between. Quickly, I was just going to give you a tour because I mentioned that there are a number of different ways that it can look. This is just a tour of a lot of different sites using this product and ways that they can look and feel, and they can look and feel very different. This actually first one is these are some of the stock themes that you can get right out of the box that other people have contributed. So there's quite a few. Usually people will take these and then modify them further and find something that they think would work for their site and then do some additional modifications on it. Linux Journal, you've been to their website. This is a Drupal website. They added, I think, one module that they wrote. And a module basically is 3 or 4 PHP files. It uses define tags to say, okay, put the title here, put this into this function and this into another. Bayosphere, which Dan Gilmore, fairly active, former with San Jose Mercury News, in his website. This is another one. This is a personal one of somebody's that I came across, but mainly to show that it's a very, again, just a completely different look. This is one I'll mention. Civic Space is a group that started off, this is the group that started off as Dean Space during the presidential campaign last year. They used Drupal, they built on it. This is a Civic Space website. One of the things that Civic Space has that Drupal doesn't is a very nice install, a wizard basically, where you point it at the web page and it asks you the questions and it does all the install for you. They kind of started to fork and go down a road of saying, okay, we're going to develop some parallelware basically that was like Drupal, but some of our custom modules on it. And then I think it's basically as the process went along, what they realized is, well, the problem is now when Drupal revs, then Civic Space is behind and the modules aren't compatible. So instead, they've basically changed and put their emphasis behind contributing modules back to Drupal to do, specifically in this case, a lot of things around organizing volunteer groups. This could be very useful for, say, SBA and things like that, because they can organize how they get people to events and who's coming and RSVPs and that type of thing. This is actually another one that I work with. This is a Civic Space site, technically running out of Civic Space. But again, it's very nice for orientation. You know, okay, I want to sign up to get a newsletter. Here's my zip code or things I'm interested in. This one we've already seen enough of. The remainder of these are actually all running out of the same server. They could be running out of the same code base, except a couple of them have moved to a newer version of Drupal, and the others haven't. So they're running out of 2 installations. But a simple form that we set up for a group on campus that was having a lot of difficulty with registration forms, because they used to have, of course, being the summer, they don't have terribly long lists right now, but these are sometimes lists of 20 and 30 things, and they had a web form set up with checkboxes next to each of 20 or 30 things, and a page that was longer than this, actually, which is difficult. Again, this one I just showed as a test site, but again, back to the idea that this is out of the same code base, exactly everything is the same, except it's pointed to a different database so that we can play with it. Technoids we saw. Technoids is not running out of our, so I didn't realize that was in there. This one, the information technology site, and what it looked like before we changed the theme. So that's really what I kind of had to say about content management systems, unless people have questions. I also can talk about, if anybody's interested, and I know it was in the thing, there was the open journal system that we're using for journal management and editorial process, if we want to talk about that.
Is there any other You mentioned there were some modules. Are there any other like WYSIWYG plugins or modules that you can use so that, for users that like to, like their Word environment, you can give them a little more familiar environment instead of...
Yeah, and actually, thank you very much for that question, because one of the things I was going to show is, this is a list of the modules that are available, and specifically to some of the WYSIWYG stuff, you saw, if you very quickly there was one, Easy MLM, if you're using Easy Mailing List Manager to integrate it with your mailing lists. Flexinode is the one that allows us to create different types of content. There are a number around images and Image Assistant. Image Assistant actually creates a very easy WYSIWYG tool for inserting images. And it really doesn't do a whole lot else. And I'm going to forget what it's called here, but somewhere. So that, for example, the text box there, you could put this module in and then have the HTML tool.
And of course, there are multiple ones. SDK editors
right.
as well. I think.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of nice about what you're starting to see is multiple
right.
WYSIWYG editors available, so that you have possibilities of supporting multiple browsers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's tiny. To just say WYSIWYG, but as you said, there are some others that actually, that's what they do, they just don't have it in their description.
You showed that attachments piece too.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when the user attaches a PDF or themselves? What happens to that file on the computer?
And I apologize, but I'm going to go here because I know quickly where to find it. This is one of my personal sites. Hopefully. So this is a post that I just attached several PDFs to, and it's handled by the theme how they show up. And I can also another post that actually has attachments. Is this one, and the photos on this are each attachments. So on this one we took and put the photos in the text. You'll notice there's no list of them at the bottom. And when I edit the document, I see a list down here of these are the files that have been attached. And I can check off, so I can even have some of them show up in that little list at the bottom and not others if I want to include them as images.
I was wondering, are you going to roll this out for your school website now? Are you going to use this for that? Or?
Yes.
And do you have some kind of, I've got like 10 questions. Sorry about that. Can you figure out, do you do LDAP integration or anything like that? Or
Not yet. And that's one of we're really pushing right now, and I have been actually for a few months with Campus IT, who's talking about doing LDAP. As I mentioned briefly at the beginning, it's only a slight exaggeration for me to say that people have 20 username and password combinations. We have, anybody probably has 10 that they routinely use for different things, different systems. We even have with our email system, if you're logging in through the client, it's one password. If you log in through the web, it's another password. And the two aren't synced. And so the single sign-on, I definitely think is huge. LDAP, I think, is the way to go. And we're also...
Does it have something to do with that already, or do we have to write
I believe that it does. I know it did at one point. Albert.
I actually know that it does. Yeah, there's an API that will let you write. I've written the one against the MySQL databases that CALI runs. Authentication. Let me never use Drupaler for that. For what I was using and used for. But yeah, there's an API that's pretty well documented that lets you write out alternate authentications so that you can run it against LDAP, you can run it against another database system, anything, different things.
So you got to probably write a little bit of code that
Yeah.
have you listen kind of areas, kind of what
Yeah, the PHPs, it's pretty well documented. They used to have a lot of modules for third-party authentication, but they pulled them out like 2 revisions ago, because I think that what they were trying to do was get people to pay to get those. They were fairly popular, but hard to maintain, because like things would change, or LDAP needs to be, like if you're doing LDAP, you need to be able to configure it specifically to whatever your LDAP thing is. So, it's hard to have sort of a generic thing to plug in. So they pulled a lot of them out, but you can also hire the guys who originally wrote them, write them for you.
And a number, I've noticed just with some of the others, like with the actions and actually the workflow module, if you look at the website right now, those are not listed for the current release. They are, however, in the CVS or the bleeding edge releases, and they work very well and are very stable. And I've seen that with some of the authentication stuff as well, has been back and forth. So it does take a little undercover work. Until we got some commitment from the campus that they were going to do LDAP, I was quite frankly looking at POP3 authentication because I didn't want to give them yet another password, and at least that would be, I could say, well, use your email password.
Do you have people editing the site using this that are giving you feedback so far, or do you want to get
I have just a few people, basically my team, working on editing this site. One faculty member who's using the banker site, although he hasn't gotten real active about doing a lot of editing yet. A few others, especially on the Boise State site that I showed a little bit. There were a number of people, when I took that over, it was running in a nuke environment. It was getting hacked about 3 times a day. And we've reached the point where we said, no site is better than having something up at this point while waiting for me to get around to doing the transition. And there I met a number of people who said, we were told we were going to have this in the past, and when you said it, we didn't believe it, and we didn't think it would work, and we thought it was going to be terrible. But this is actually really cool, and I can understand it, and it's pretty easy to use.
So I guess I want to understand the LDAP integration, because you clicked an edit button to edit this page based on what? So I have public view, obviously, I guess I'm a little confused as to who's doing what, whose role, how are you seeing it, and as opposed to anybody off the street coming to yourlawschool.edu.
So over here, this bottom box is basically the identity box, and you're right. I'm seeing it because I was already logged in and using cookies. Here's exactly the same thing. Now over here I have a login box instead of the little menu that I had that allowed me to administer things. And if I go into a piece of content, I no longer have the edit tab and the other tabs up there associated with it. Which is one of the beauties of it, is that you can, once you log in, you can do that browse and go back and forth and quite easily edit and revise.
So there's really no need for a preview at all. In other words, once you're logged in, you're editing content, sort of like a WYSIWYG editor almost. You're not.
Sort of. There are two things. There are revisions. So if you want to save an old revision and start a new revision, it will do versioning. There's also, there is a preview function on each page at the bottom. You can either say submit, which will commit the changes, or preview, which will show you the changes. And you can also, if you want to, as an administrator, force previews so that things have to be previewed before they can be submitted.
I got
Yeah.
another one. You talked about having kind of multiple feeds and kind of links, and you're doing that by basically saying at multiple sites on the same server. Is that the only way to accomplish that? I mean, I basically have a website that I'm very seriously considering moving to the system for our law school system. But there's a couple different sections that look different, but they're not split out on DNS. They're not doing anything like that. So I'm just kind of wondering about how you might go about that.
There has fairly recently, and I don't know, Elmer, if you played with it or not, there's been something committed recently to allow different themes for each individual blog. Now, that's not quite what you're looking for, but it seems like it would be fairly easy to modify that to say, okay, if I'm in this section or I have this particular taxonomy term that says that I'm in this section, then apply a different theme. There are two, as well, specific elements that show up. So especially if you have just one or two pages that you want a different, you can do quite a bit within that full PHP code, and you could have one page that looks quite a bit different while maintaining the same navigation and the same frame.
Is that how you?
I was wondering if there are tools to consume web services. For example, say at an institutional repository, you want to bring the content into your site and make it appear there directly.
There are tools to consume RSS feeds, and I think there might be an XML or a OPML. But as far as specific tools for an individual web service, that would be something that you would have to add. This is the RSS feed tool that is basically reading these various RSS feeds and posting them. So there's at least some work done towards things that would probably give you ideas on how to do that.
My question kind of piggybacks his question, which is if you wanted to repurpose the same content in multiple versions, perhaps even extensively than XML, a little bit more detailed than an RSS feed. Is that pretty easy? Is that possible?
Yeah, because it's all in that database. And one of the other things I didn't talk about is you can even do, with these multiple sites, you can have them have part of their database separate and part the same, which gets tricky, and especially with upgrades. And as I mentioned, some modules have database components, and those get particularly tricky to upgrade, because if you're using the same code base for all of your sites and you want to do an upgrade, then if you have multiple databases attached, all the databases have to get upgraded. It supports prefixing, database prefixing, so if you're only allowed one MySQL database, which I assume in this environment probably people can have as many as they want. If you're only allowed one, like with a commercial hosting provider, you can prefix every table with Law 1, Law 2, Law 3, depending on which law site you want it to apply to. It works well once you've set it up, but the code as far as applying a prefix to the tables for you is all manual. So basically you go through and do a manual edit of the file that says create these tables, and therefore anytime you do an upgrade, you also have to manually edit any files that touch the database. So there are certainly some areas for improvement.
And I was just going to ask, the data is stored in the database, like if we were looking at a page like that, how much formatting is carried along with the data into the blob in the database?
The only is like page breaks and returns. If you put in any HTML code that you put in there, it's basically just stored as an ASCII text field. It's a long text field. It does, and one of the other things I didn't mention, a couple of things I didn't mention, it does cache pages, so it will automatically cache. So internally it has its own cache, which can occasionally get kind of goofy, and you just go in and clean out the cache table so that it gets rid of the cache page because it doesn't update as quickly as you want. But in terms of the actual page itself, what's stored there is what's in that long text field on the website.
Then just another question about, I guess, extensibility. We have a lot of content that's in SD Banner, which is basically an article database for a lot of universities that, and to get at that stuff, I imagine that I'm just going to have probably going to have to write custom code for that. There's probably
It depends. There is a module for importing basically tab delimiter or some kind of delimited data, whether it's in comma separated or tables, and automatically creating a node out of each line, say, of something similar to an Excel file. So
if I want to query that database on the fly,
if you want to query that on the fly, then you'd have to write a module, which isn't terribly complex. The PHP framework for it is out there, and you can get started pretty easily.
Yeah, and they're actually, because you can actually query from, if you write the SQL, because there are pages and like how to do like geek log through PAL, where you pull it out in the geek log database structure and then stick it directly into Drupal just by running a PHP script that just basically runs the query, reformats what comes out, sticks it back into the insert statement. So I'd imagine you could pretty much do the same thing with accepting whatever oracles to understand. And the tool is working with like comma separated files and stuff are actually really good.
Your choice of Drupal over all those others that were listed in that long list that you started with, what was your criteria for saying we're going to go with this one?
It's multiple, but one of the huge ones, besides it's well supported, it's active, so the taxonomy is something that I've even seen commercial implementations that don't come close to handling taxonomy nearly as well as, and the flexibility to classify as many times, as many different ways as I need, and it's a limitless, basically, matrix of how many ways you want to classify information. Which goes back in part to the using different content for different sites. The idea being that I'll have a central database, the registrar comes in, enters all this content through the registrar interface, but then other people access the same data through their either current students or on the faculty member website. So.
Are you going to use the user commenting feature, or is anyone using user comments in the law?
We haven't yet on anything. Well, I mean, technically it is turned on, but nobody's actually used it like on our technology site.
Imagine that you inherited a truly heinous website with
I did.
terrible structure and just blank files everywhere. And so your main business requirement is to limit what people can do with those files. I looked at a couple of files, but because of the way the website is structured, anything I tried gave people too broad abilities to edit. And so what I'm mainly looking for right now, until I can use the website, is a way to stop people from breaking it. So from your research, what would you recommend?
I think this would be a good option. It may be more work in terms of redoing it. As far as just something to overlay on top of what you're doing right now, I don't have a good answer for you. I mean, O'Reilly's PHP cookbook, I think, has a couple of recipes for doing some wrappers, which might be a way of putting some security on who has access to edit certain files if they're doing some kind of editing through the web. But I don't have a good answer for just something to overlay. Now if you can take that content, strip out the header and footer tags and the body tags and put it into something, then I would look at Drupal. Possibly PHP website. PHP website has a nicer, fancier looking, better, cuter icons in the administrative interface. As far as end users editing content, seems to me like they have to know more about what it is they want to do instead of just clicking on a link that says create content and basically being presented with a form that asks them for the appropriate information.
HTML and just have a certain number of tags that you'll allow.
Yeah, even that box down at the bottom there where I showed you there are 3 types of HTML input and PHP input, that you can even restrict so that people only see one of those or they don't even see anything there, and it just takes that what they're doing is text with possibly some HTML tags in it, but it doesn't have to be completely properly formed. If you're doing a lot of that, by the way, there is a module that will take the user input and close any open tags, which you'll probably want, especially if you're going to integrate their documents with anybody else's, because if they forget to close a bold or an italic or, heaven forbid, a blank, you probably want to close it before you get there.
I haven't really seen, I've got a site that's really essentially a static site, so I haven't really been able to figure out a good way to get it just kind of import it to this. Do you have any suggestions or ideas about that?
What I anticipate doing, and actually real quickly, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I know we're way over time, so if you want to go and catch the shuttle, please feel free. What I anticipate doing is using a script, probably a series of PHP scripts. In my case, I've got a lot of server-side includes, so those make it real easy to say, okay, at this point, cut this file off and drop it up, and making text files out of them, and then reading each text file into the database.
All right. I'm going to share it forward.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Maybe there's some import script too, like once you get the text file, it's stripped out.
Right. Well, and it would be fairly easy once you had a text file to make it, say, take the stacked text files, make them into a tab delimited, and then, or comma delimited.
Yeah, I was thinking about using Perl for that, but sometimes it's hard to find very close.
And that's why this is a preview, not a postmortem.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. That was very helpful.
Thank you.
I do have another question. I'm still a little confused. Within a theme, which is essentially templates and styles and so forth, what defines the page structure? You have contents within the database, you have the overall theme. What happens if you have separate content areas and